The front door of Murphy's Diner hadn't opened for a black person in 23 years. Not once, not ever. So when Muhammad Ali walked through that door on a sweltering July afternoon in 1974, every conversation stopped, every fork froze halfway to every mouth, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. What happened in the next 20 minutes didn't just change the life of the diner's owner. It shattered everything he thought he knew about himself, his father, and the promise he'd made at a grave 15 years earlier. It was July 18, 1974, exactly 3 months after Ali had shocked the world by defeating George Foreman in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle. At 32 years old, Muhammad Ali was once again the heavyweight champion of the world, and he was driving through rural Alabama with his small entourage, heading to a speaking engagement in Birmingham. The heat that day was unbearable. Even with the air conditioning running full blast in Ali's Cadillac, sweat beaded on everyone's forehead. They'd been driving for 2 hours without seeing a decent place to stop when Howard Bingham, Ali's longtime photographer and friend, spotted a small diner about a quarter-mile off the main highway. "There," Howard said, pointing. "Murphy's Diner. Looks like they might have cold drinks." As they pulled into the gravel parking lot, the first thing they noticed was how quiet everything was. No other cars, no people walking around, just a small, weather-beaten building with peeling white paint and a hand-painted sign that read Murphy's Diner, Esther 1951. And there, in the front window, written in faded red letters on a piece of cardboard, was another sign. "We reserve the right to refuse service." Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer, saw it first. "Champ," he said quietly, "maybe we should find somewhere else." But Ali was already getting out of the car. He'd seen signs like this before. He knew what they meant. And he knew that in 1974, 10 years after the Civil Rights Act, these signs were supposed to be gone. But in rural Alabama, some things died hard. "It's just lunch," Ali said simply. "We're going to get some lunch." The bell above the door chimed as Ali pushed it open, and the sound seemed to echo longer than it should have. There were maybe a dozen people inside, all white, all staring. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 40s with sandy brown hair and tired eyes. His name was Thomas Murphy, and this diner was everything he had left in the world. When Thomas saw Muhammad Ali walk through his door, his first emotion wasn't anger or fear. It was panic, pure, cold panic, because 15 years earlier, standing at his father's grave, Thomas had made a promise, and now for the first time since that day, he was going to have to choose between keeping that promise and doing what he knew was right. "We're closed," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ali looked around the diner. People were clearly eating. Coffee was being poured. The grill was sizzling behind the counter. "Doesn't look closed," Ali said calmly. "Smells like you're making some good food back there." Thomas's hands started to shake. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. Every eye in the diner was on him now. Some of these people had known his father. Some of them expected him to uphold the family tradition. Some of them were waiting to see if Thomas Murphy was the same kind of man his father had been. "I said we're closed," Thomas repeated, but his voice cracked as he said it. Ali didn't move from his spot near the door. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled, not a mocking smile, not an angry smile, but something gentle and understanding. "What's your name?" Ali asked. "Thomas," the man replied automatically, then seemed surprised he'd answered. "Thomas, I'm Muhammad Ali. You know who I am?" "Yeah," Thomas said. "You're the boxer." "That's right. And you know what I do for a living, Thomas?" Thomas nodded. "I fight people," Ali continued. "Big, strong, dangerous people. Men who want to hurt me. Men who've trained their whole lives to knock me out. And you know what I learned from all that fighting?" Thomas shook his head. "I learned that the strongest men aren't the ones who throw the hardest punches. The strongest men are the ones who do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the sizzle from the grill seemed quieter now. "Thomas," Ali said, his voice still calm and gentle, "I can see you're a good man. I can see this is tearing you up inside. So let me ask you something. Is there a reason you can't serve me? A real reason?" Thomas's eyes darted to a framed photograph on the wall behind the counter. It showed an older man in an apron, standing proudly in front of the same diner. The man looked like an older version of Thomas. "My father," Thomas said quietly. "Tell me about your father," Ali said. For a moment, Thomas looked like he might cry. He built this place with his own hands, worked 16-hour days for 20 years to make it successful. "When he died, I promised him." Thomas's voice trailed off. "What did you promise him?" "I promised him I'd keep it the way he wanted it. The way it always was." Ali nodded slowly. "Your father was a good provider?" "The best," Thomas said, and there was pride in his voice now. "Worked hard to take care of his family? Every day of his life?" "Sounds like a man who knew what it meant to take care of people," Ali said. "Sounds like a man who understood responsibility." Thomas nodded. "Thomas," Ali said, taking a step closer to the counter. "Can I tell you something about fathers and sons?" Without waiting for an answer, Ali continued. "My father wanted me to be a house painter like him. Good, honest work. But that wasn't my path. I had to choose between making my father proud and being true to myself. You know what I learned?" Thomas was listening intently now. "I learned that the best way to honor your father isn't to copy everything he did. It's to take the best parts of who he was, the hard work, the dedication, the love for family, and use those things to be better than he was." "But he said," Thomas started. "Your father said what he believed was right at the time," Ali interrupted gently. "But times change, Thomas. The world changes. And sometimes being loyal to someone you love means growing beyond what they taught you." Ali looked around the diner, at all the faces staring at him. "How many of you knew Thomas's father?" he asked. Several hands went up. "Was he a good man?" "The best," said an elderly woman in a corner booth. "He'd give you the shirt off his back," added a middle-aged farmer. "Then he raised a good son," Ali said. "And good men don't let other good men go hungry because of the color of their skin." Thomas was crying now, tears streaming down his cheeks. His whole body was shaking. "I don't know how," he whispered. I don't know how to change." Ali reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. He placed it gently on the counter. "You start by making me a hamburger," Ali said. "And while you're making it, you think about what kind of man your father really was, not the rules he followed, but the heart he had. And then you ask yourself, what would that heart tell him to do today?" For a long moment, Thomas stared at the $20 bill. Then he looked at Ali. Then he looked at the photograph of his father. Finally, slowly, he picked up the money. "How do you want that burger?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. "However you make them best," Ali said. "And Thomas, make one for yourself too. We're going to eat together." What happened next was extraordinary. As Thomas began cooking Ali's hamburger, other customers started talking. Not arguing, not debating, just talking. About the weather, about crops, about their families. And gradually, the tension in the room began to dissolve. When the food was ready, Thomas came around from behind the counter and sat down at a table with Ali. They ate together in comfortable silence, two men sharing a meal. It was the first time in the diner's 23-year history that a black man and a white man had eaten at the same table. When they finished eating, Thomas walked Ali to the door. "Mr. Ali," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. That sign in the window, it's coming down today." Ali shook Thomas's hand. "Your father would be proud of you, Thomas. Not because you changed, but because you had the courage to grow." As Ali and his entourage drove away, they could see Thomas in the rearview mirror, carefully removing the sign from his window. 3 weeks later, Ali received a letter in the mail. It was from Thomas Murphy. "Dear Mr. Ali," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that my diner looks different now. I hired my first black employee last week, a young man named James who reminds me a lot of my son. Business has been better than ever. People come from 3 counties over, not just for the food, but because they heard about what happened here, what you did here. But I wanted to tell you something else, something more important. I've been thinking about that day for weeks, about what you said about honoring my father. You were right. The best parts of him, the hard work, the kindness to customers, the way he'd help anyone in need, those weren't about keeping people out. They were about bringing people together. I found some old letters from my father that I'd never read before, letters he wrote to my mother before they were married. In one of them, he wrote about a black soldier who saved his life in Korea. He called him a hero. He said he hoped someday America would be a place where a man's character mattered more than the color of his skin. Mr. Ali, I think my father would have served you that hamburger himself. I think he would have been proud to do it. And I think he would have been ashamed of the son who almost turned you away. Thank you for helping me become the man my father really raised me to be. Respectfully, Thomas Murphy." Ali kept that letter for the rest of his life. He would sometimes read it to friends, always ending with the same observation. "Thomas Murphy taught me something that day. He taught me that courage isn't about being strong enough to fight your enemies. It's about being strong enough to fight the parts of yourself that aren't worthy of who you want to become." Murphy's diner stayed open for another 15 years. Thomas Murphy became a pillar of his community, known for his fairness and his kindness to everyone who walked through his door. When he retired in 1989, the town held a ceremony in his honor. The guest speaker was a young man named James Murphy, Thomas's son, named after the employee who had helped change Thomas's heart. When Thomas Murphy died in 2003, his obituary mentioned many things: his service to the community, his successful business, his loving family. But the line that meant the most to his family was this: Thomas Murphy will be remembered as a man who had the courage to grow,